On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the new cool from South Korea as reported by the German media and more. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Friday, March 27th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. It's that time of the week yet again during which we take a look at a number of stories about South Korea that have been making global headlines in recent days. For more on this, I have Chloe Borgnon with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio. Chloe, welcome back.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, thank you.
Chloe, the German media says Korea is the new cool kid on the block. Now, speaking as a foreign journalist based here in South Korea, what do you believe has earned South Korea this title?
Well, I would say there's a few things, but if we take a look at the content industry, let's say, that is meaning the publisher, the broadcasters, also the advertiser, the film producing music, computer games as well, animation, movies, musical, other creative content. So broadly speaking, we're not just speaking about K-pop, obviously, that's the main thing we were thinking about immediately when speaking about being cool. But the content industry is the exportation powerhouse of South Korea. They had record high exportation in 2024, so that's the last full year that we have yet for the data as given by the Ministry of Culture, Sport and Tourism. And they explained, for example, that if we're just giving that number, $14 billion were made in 2024. That's 5.5% up from 2023. We can imagine that with K-pop Demon Hunter exploding, the comeback of also BTS, Blackpink, maybe Big Bang soon, we can imagine that those numbers are going to go higher again. So I'm speaking from an economy perspective because that's the way I've been covering it for France 24 recently. I feel like it's one of the way the cool side of Korea is shown is the interest that can be felt in the markets and in the exportation, because once people are interested in the Hallyu, so the Korean soft power wave, like culture wave, then they will be also getting more interest in food or in fashion as well, so in the culture in general. So that's the interesting part. Seeing, for example, I was covering BTS concert on Saturday, and if I'm just taking the example of French, obviously, I could, in the people being there, I could hear so many French people, and probably people when you were talking with them, a few of them did come for the comeback. So not only the concert in Gangwon, but obviously maybe they will have tickets for Goyeong, or they have tickets in for the European dates, and they're still coming to visit Korea because of BTS and because of the Hallyu wave. So I would say that's probably what is the main title for South Korea being cool, is that this capacity of culture to be able to bring people in. And I'm saying that's also, and that's said by a lot of French medias as well, French being also one of those soft power through culture powerhouse. So that's, I feel like probably all we can understand each other on that side.
Right, indeed. Colin, as Chloe just mentioned, BTS's comeback concert, it has renewed media attention on the strength of Korea's cultural diplomacy, if you will. That being said, do you believe this strength has indeed been making or taking greater form in recent days?
Yes, as Chloe was saying, this concert, this BTS comeback concert in Gwanghwamun, I was hearing reports from friends who were out there even in days or weeks before, like, there are so many more foreigners around than there used to be. What are they all doing in Gwanghwamun this much earlier than the concert itself? And evidently there were many there for the show. And I wonder if the attention isn't almost too much from the media at this point. It may feel a bit burdensome, especially in the aftermath of the concert. There was so much about this controversy about how many people were actually there. Was it 40,000? Was it 100,000? Either way, a far cry from the projected 250,000, which was about the number of people on the streets for the World Cup. I think that was the benchmark. So it didn't hit that mark. I think it got 18 million streams or so on Netflix. So as always, Netflix is the real winner here, I suspect. But in any case, I do think that really, if you look at the profile of Korean pop culture, it's only been getting larger. It's only been getting higher in recent years, certainly since I've been here for about 10 years. In recent years, I do wonder if maybe too many eggs are being put into the pop music basket and giving Korea this image of being a country for people who are into that kind of thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing to be into, but not everybody likes pop music at all, let alone pop music of their very specific K-pop type. And Korea has other things to offer, of course. And Chloe was speaking of her own country, France. And I've heard France compared to Korea many times now, actually. It's getting more common to say France, I believe, in the words of the Korean-American/French writer Uni Hong, that Korea now has a kind of perma-cool, she calls it, as France does. France was a lot earlier in being culturally appealing to the whole world. Now Korea, she finds, is becoming the same way, but France was never about one thing. It was maybe, you know, the food is probably the most prominent thing people like about France, French culture abroad, but it was never just one thing. It could also be music, film, literature. There's a wide range of cultural products, cultural elements for which France has been well regarded. So I think Korea would do well to diversify the portfolio a bit, if that's possible. But sometimes I think the K-pop industry can seem like such a gravy train sometimes. It's hard to look at some asset that might not perform as well in the short term, but maybe in the long term could perform better.
Right, maybe. Chloe, beyond diplomacy, Sweden-based research entity V-Dem Institute says that there's also been a tangible rebound in South Korea's democracy. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so according to the V-Dem Institute, South Korea went from being 44th to 22nd on the list of democracies in the world this year. Actually, it just regained its status. So it used to be way higher than 44th position. Before, it's back to being a liberal democracy, which is the highest ranking category in the V-Dem's classification. So why was it downgraded? It was obviously because of the martial law event and what was following at the very end of 2024. And because the V-Dem Institute is doing a once-a-year grading, the South Korea ended up being at the 44th position for the full 2025 year of 2025, sorry. And then, but we knew it was going to be for a short time because the V-Dem Institute themselves said at one point that, and a lot of pundits around the world were saying that the way the crisis was handled by the democratic institutions, but also how the people were reacting, showed that the democracy in South Korea was very strong and stayed really strong. So that means the way the president of the time, Yoon Suk-yeol, was impeached, the way then presidential elections were able to take place, or trials are going on. So it showed that the democracy was still strong and that this position was not to be kept for South Korea. Obviously, the downgrade was not going to last. And it also shows the strength of the people. And this is speaking about the people who came flooding the streets very immediately after the announcement of the martial law and who stayed there asking for the impeachment, for example, and were in front of the National Assembly, also on Gangwon Plaza for a long time. And those people, or the Korean citizens, have been recommended by a few of Korean intellectuals. They have been asking them to be considered for Nobel Prize, for Peace Nobel Prize, recently saying that they have been defending the democracy against martial law. And I feel like all those elements and the strengths of the democracy has been shown in the way the V-Dem Institute has been ranking again South Korea way higher than it was last year.
Right. And Colin, as a long-term resident here in South Korea, what are your thoughts with regard to perhaps the state of South Korea's democracy in recent times?
Yes, you do see South Korea's rank as a democracy, or its evaluation as a democracy, kind of fluctuate. I've certainly seen that in the course of the time I've been here. And international organizations like the Economist Intelligence Unit or Freedom House, they usually put it up pretty high, but within that, it's never quite up at the highest, and there are various reasons for that. Current events, as Chloe mentioned, or there are certain respects that, maybe the freedom of speech is not quite as defended as well as it could be in South Korea compared to other democracies in its rank. And there are some procedural issues one could question in South Korea. When we look back to, say, another event that happened while I've been here, the impeachment of Park Geun-hye, the president when I arrived, in fact. I think many agree that she was a president who was not fit for the job, it turned out. But when you look at how it actually all fell out and the way that people were out there protesting, there is a big culture of protest here, of course, and a long-standing one. And the way that the National Assembly sort of found a reason to remove her in response, evidently, to anger in the streets. Well, this can be read as a victory for democracy or something a little bit more frightening, I would say, in that in most modern democracies, the republic is structured in such a way as to prevent people getting angry in the streets from having too much influence on the state. And when you see a response that is almost direct in that way to public anger, you can say it's good, or you can say, maybe democracy as we know it today exists not to amplify the voice in the street, but to, in a way, reduce the voice in the street and encourage stability. So that's another reason why I think it doesn't do quite as well. South Korea doesn't do quite as well in the rankings as people feel like it should, because when you see public anger and the state responding to that anger, it feels like democracy, but it's a direct kind of democracy that's not quite the same thing, not the institutional democracy I think a lot of these organizations use as their definition.
Right. Meanwhile, Chloe, this year's Happy City Index, as well as the 50 best cities, have been disclosed. This being said, where does the capital Seoul stand?
Yeah, so if we take a look at those two different rankings, so Happy City Index, Seoul is 26, right behind Paris. I'm French, I have to say it. So they're both in the top 50 cities. They say that it was the gold cities classroom. So Seoul is doing very well, because it's comparing all of the cities, like the capital cities of the world. So that's a very good place to be. 50 best cities is another one. It's done by Time Out. And they are saying that Seoul is 9th, between Bangkok, which is 8, and Tokyo, which is 10. Sorry, so that's a very Asian classroom there, like ranking there. If we take a look closer to what was giving that ranking for Seoul, Happy City is an interesting ranking actually, because it's a world largest community-driven study on urban development. So they are focusing on the quality of life of present and future generation in the cities. They have like 6 dimensions to the index. And obviously the ones who are in the top 50 are the ones who are performing very well in all of those elements, saying that it's about the citizens, the governance, the environment, the economy, health, and mobility, so the infrastructure for the mobility. And the other one, the 50 best cities, so I was saying the ranking is done by Time Out. That is a global media, also a curator for travel. So they have been ranking mostly regarding on what you could do in those cities if you come to visit. So it's a bit of a different way of saying it. The first one is mostly living here and having future generation living here. The other one is more like, if you're a tourist, where should you go and where should you want to live for at least some time, but as a foreigner. And what they were saying is that they were speaking about diversity of activities in Seoul, so they are not agreeing with Colin on this point, I guess, but what they were saying is you can either come see the cherry blossom, or you can come in winter, see the snow. They were speaking about the food scene, especially bakeries, that is booming at the moment, and also say that according to their own poll, people are happy to live here. So they were saying local people, so people from Seoul, are happy to live in the city. So that's, according to them, a very strong point as well, which explained the position of Seoul here in the ranking.
Right then, Colin, regardless of the status of Seoul, the happiness index of South Koreans nationwide appears to have slumped. How do you care to explain this reality?
There are a few different ways to do that. Number one is that it seems that unhappiness is to some degree incorporated into the Korean identity. So it's not something a survey can really do much about, I suspect. I mean, I don't really put much stock into these broad cultural concepts. Like, there is hung, the collective joy that breaks out among Koreans, ostensibly. There's jong, the bonds between Koreans, and there's han, the sense of sorrow embedded by sort of national history, but on a personal level. So when that gets referenced quite so often, you have to think, well, maybe there's some foundational element to this sort of presumption of unhappiness here. Now, you wouldn't necessarily, depending on the life you live, encounter that expressed on a day-to-day basis, but it does get brought up over and over again, I suspect, for a reason. I mean, in any case, this actually it's a very suitable way to approach this topic, because much of the problem, if a problem it is, I suspect comes from the culture of comparison here in Korea. Everybody's always comparing themselves to their neighbors or their coworkers, or just figuring out where they are in the grand jockeying for status in the society. Every society has status anxiety. Here it seems especially pronounced. Alain de Botton's book on status anxiety was a big hit here, as a matter of fact, unsurprisingly, I would say. But when we look at these lists as well, OECD numbers or democracy rankings or what have you, happy city lists, best cities list, there's they get a lot of attention, more attention than sometimes they get in other places. There's more concern about Seoul's own ranking or Korea's own ranking just because, well, where do we rank? Where do I rank? It's such a matter of continual concern here on the individual, and the group, and the national level. And even if you're on top, you're never really going to be happy with your ranking because Seoul could get to number 1, best city in the world, but then it's always like, who's about to knock us off? Who's coming up behind us? Is Paris going to come steal our thunder, or whoever it might be? Is Cape Town going to do it? Cape Town ranked fairly high on this one, which was notable. But in any case, I think when you're always concerned about where you stand, because if your position is always subject to change, you're never going to feel truly secure, and probably never going to feel like you can acknowledge your own happiness for that reason.
Right. Moving forward, Chloe, South Korea, it's launched an energy-saving campaign to ease the broader fallout of the unrest in the Middle East. I believe its counterparts in Europe as well as in Asia are adopting similar initiatives. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so I saw an article from the New York Times, and in it was quite interesting to say that they're saying there's only 2 possibilities for the governments who are actually feeling the pressure of this looming oil crisis, energetic crisis as well. They can either spend, well, they can do both actually, but they can spend more money to kind of protect the people from feeling the effects of the rising prices. But that means obviously increasing debts, being able to get those emergency budgets that you need to get voted from the assembly, etc. Or they could have more restrictive approach, so that's energy saving measures that you could implement on the people, but there is a risk of getting the citizen and therefore the electors angry. So all of the countries are currently feeling the pressure, have to kind of balance between the two in the measures that they could, because some countries are not really able to put more funds into protecting the people economically speaking. So South Korea has been doing both, actually. So for now, there's been a series of measures to ease the financial pressures on drivers, for example. They have been putting a bit more efforts to help capping the price of the gasoline and making sure that people are still going to feel the rise, but they're trying to make it as slow as possible, hoping that the crisis might stop at one point. There's also been expanded fuel tax cut, but there's also another thing that's been done, and it's the president has asked people to take measures as much as possible, energy-cutting measures. So it can be anything. If we look at the personal point of view, what we could each do, he's been saying, for example, we could take shorter showers in the morning. We could also charge the phone and the electric vehicles during the day when there's less people asking for it as well. There's different kind of ideas like this. And then there's also more of a more national approach. So for now, for civil servants, there's a 5-day vehicle rotation. So depending on the number of starting on your immatriculation plaque, some people can't come with their car on those specific days to the office. So they have to kind of find other way, either public transportation or coming with some colleagues who have the right to come on that day. And the presidential office has been asking also if private companies could start implementing it. For now, it's not mandatory for private sectors, but it is highly suggested to do it to try and avert the crisis that might be really impacting very strongly South Korea if the war in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz stays closed for a much longer period. It's been also impacting other countries, obviously. So if we have a look, for example, there is at least 3 countries that have been doing the 4-day work week, implementing it on national level. So Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and Pakistan have been asking people to come to work for 4 days and then stay at home for the next one. So it's kind of reminding the pandemic time, you know, when that was for a completely different reason, but people still had to adapt. And there's been also the same idea of mandating workers to stay at home to save fuels, for example, in Great Britain or in Australia. And just to finish with that, experts from the Fortune newspaper was saying that actually European big cities, for example, are less going to be doing this event thing of asking people to not take their car in the bigger city, because they have a very much older and more developed public transportation network, meaning that people are not relying that much on their personal cars, so they're not going to be having to put the same measures on.
Right. And also here in South Korea, Colin, fears of a potential shortage in supplies of garbage bags appear to be fueling hoarding practices. Very briefly speaking, what do you propose to discourage such hoarding?
Yeah, I heard some days ago from a friend saying my wife sent me out to buy more garbage bags. Because here in Korea, some may not know, if you have to throw your garbage away in special bags issued by the district, and you buy them from convenience stores or wherever. And sometimes they're hard to find anyway. But now, because of this rumor that there could be panic buying, there is panic buying. And so it reminds me of the pandemic, where Korea was not panic buying, but the US, where I'm from, were buying up all the toilet paper apparently, and that you couldn't find it there. So here it's like you could have a price mechanism, might not be politically viable, but in any case there is a secondary market. People are no doubt reselling them at a higher price now. But we have heard that the government or governments in Korea have a supply, like a stockpile of these for 3 months or so is the usual stretch of time, the usual span of time they have them for. So if that is more widely known, I think maybe the feelings, the emotions fueling the panic buying can be tamped down a bit. But right now, I'm sure somebody's making decent money reselling them. It can't last forever.
Right. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. Colin, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Colin, thank you. And Chloe, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
All right, that ends this week's editions of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.